Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCGplayer affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, on today's episode, I've got a $35 deck tech for you on a really exciting commander pair. It's not partners, it's like a pair of commanders. They're together on the card, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's jump into it. So the ground rules for my deck techs are as follows. The budget is $50 or less, and that's an overall deck cost. So that cost includes shipping as well as commanders as long as they're $10 or less, but basic lands will not be included in that price. On my deck techs, I'm going to take you through the strategy, the tactics, and how the deck wins. So today's episode comes to you courtesy of Tyler, a general tier patron who's been supporting this channel for over a year now. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Tyler. And today, Tyler's going to handle the intro for me.
Hello Mitch, this is Tyler from California. For my deck tech, I would like to see how you take on Tibor and Lumia, focusing on spell-slinging with a little bit of creature stealing.
So as Tyler said, today's deck tech's going to be built around Tibor and Lumia with a Spellslinger build with a minor sub-theme of creature stealing. They're a 3/3 human wizard that costs 2 blue-red. They have whenever you cast a blue spell, target creature gains flying until end of turn. Whenever you cast a red spell, Tibor and Lumia deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. So we can cast a ton of spells, give certain creatures flying, and take creatures that don't have flying out. So what's the strategy for this deck? Well, we're going to control the board by pinging down opposing armies. We've got ways to make our pinging more effective and to keep our creatures out of harm's way. And then how do we win with this deck? We're going to take our opponents out with an army of tokens or with their own creatures. We're going to have ways to temporarily steal powerful creatures or even permanently steal them as well. And as always, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. So let's start things off with tactic number 1, ramp and reduce. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got 3 mana rocks that each cost 2 and tap for colorless. Guardian Idol does come into play temp, but we can also pay 2 to make into a 2/2 until end of turn. Prismatic Lens can help us filter our mana, and we can pay 1 and tap and sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. Next up, we've got Izzet Signet, which we can pay 1 and 2 and tap it for both of our colors. And then Everflowing Chalice is a very flexible mana rock with multi-kicker 2. It comes into the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked, and it taps to add colors for each charge counter on it. Next up, we've got Izzet Locket, which can tap for either of our colors, and by paying Izzet, we can tap and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. And then there's Midnight Clock, which taps for a blue, and we can pay 2 and a blue to put an hour counter on it. It has at the beginning of each upkeep, put an hour counter on Midnight Clock. And when the 12th hour counter is put on Midnight Clock, shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library, then draw 7 cards, exile Midnight Clock. So this can ramp us and be card advantage as well. And finally, we've got 2 mana reducers with Goblin Electromancer and Jace's Sanctum. Goblin Electromancer says, instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And Jace's Sanctum does the exact same thing, but it also says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. But after we've ramped, what's next? Let's find out in tactic number 2, come fly with me. First up, we're going to be running Levitation, which says creatures you control have flying. Giving all of our creatures flying gives us a huge advantage with this stack. Whenever we cast a red spell, Tibor and Lumia deal 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have flying. So just by having this enchantment in play, each of our creatures are safe from any of that damage. This allows us to cast more spells and deal more damage freely. So we're also going to be running Wonder, which says as long as it's in your graveyard and you control an island, creatures you control have flying. And then Student Development says when it has flying, flip it, and its other side says creatures you control have flying. And giving it flying is as easy as casting 1 blue spell with this deck. Now, all these are fantastic ways to give our creatures flying, but there's one way that's even better. And that way comes with our Golden Pig, which is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Archetype of Imagination. It's a 3/2 human wizard that costs 4 blue. It says creatures you control have flying, creatures your opponents control lose flying, and can't have or gain flying. So first off, this essentially makes all of our creatures unblockable unless our opponents have creatures with reach. But more importantly for this deck, it means that not only do our creatures not take any damage from Tibor and Lumia, but all of our opponents' creatures will. So even if our opponent's creatures had flying, they're going to lose flying and can't gain it back. This protects our creatures and makes our opponent's creatures a lot weaker, and that's what makes this the Golden Pig. But if we don't happen to have one of these ways to give all of our creatures flying, we've got some smaller ways that can help too. So now let's move on to tactic number 3, Cantrip. First up, we've got Leap, which says target creature gains flying until end of turn, draw a card. And then Cloak of Feathers does the exact same thing, but at sorcery speed. So essentially with our commander in play, when we cast either of these, we give 2 creatures flying. And on top of that, all these cantrips that we're going to be talking about are cheap and they replace themselves. So next up there's Brainstorm, which is going to let us draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library in any order. Next up there's Op, which says scry 1, draw a card. And then Twisted Image says switch target creature's power and toughness until end of turn, draw a card. This can help us take out a creature that might have a high toughness but a low power. Next up we've got some cantrips that can help us ping creatures down. Expedite says target creature gains haste until end of turn, draw a card. Warlord's Fury is going to give creatures we control first strike until end of turn, and we draw a card. And Crash Through is going to give creatures we control trample until end of turn, and then we draw a card. Next up, Renegade Tactics says target creature can't block this turn, draw a card. And finally, even Ryle is going to be effective in this deck. It's going to deal 1 damage to target creature we control, and then that creature gains trample, but we draw a card. Again, cheap spells like these can be fantastic at dealing damage and giving the right creatures flying. But we've also got some other ways to dig deeper into our deck. So now it's time for us to move on to tactic number 4, Deep Thoughts. First up, there's Faithless Looting, which says draw 2, then discard 2, and it's got flashback for 2 and a red. And then Thrill of Possibility makes us discard 1 card to draw 2. Tormenting Voice does the exact same thing, but at sorcery speed. Next up, there's Cathartic Reunion, which makes us discard 2 to draw 3. And then Frantic Search says draw 2, then discard 2 and untap up to 3 lands. So this spell is essentially cast for free and helps us dig deeper. Next up, there's Factor Fiction, which says reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. And then Steam Augury does the exact same thing, but in reverse. Next up, we've got some creatures that can help us draw some cards too, with Jorian, Ruin Diver, and Wavebreak Hippocamp. Jorian says whenever you cast your second spell each turn, draw a card. And Wavebreak Hippocamp says whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. So each of these cards can draw us a lot of cards throughout the game. But if we want something specific, we're going to cast Trinket Mage or Tribute Mage. When Trinket Mage enters the battlefield, we can search our library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less, reveal that card and put it into our hand, and if we do, we shuffle our library. And then Tribute Mage does the exact same thing, but for an artifact with a converted mana cost of 2. Now, these are in this deck to get some very specific cards, so let's talk about those. So it's time for us to move on to tactic number 5, Life and Death. Okay, so I fibbed just a little bit. Let's first talk about Loxodon Warhammer, which has a converted mana cost of 3, so neither of them can get this one. That being said, it gives equipped creature +3/+0 and trample and lifelink. And the most important part of that is giving lifelink to our commander. Tibor and Lumia are going to be pinging a ton of creatures, and this makes us gain a lot of life whenever we do. In no time, we can quickly and easily pad our life total. But the actual cards that we're going to tutor for deal with Death Touch. Gorgon's Head and Gorgon's Flail both give the equipped creature Death Touch. And by paying 1 and sacrificing Violent Poison, we give target creature Death Touch until end of turn. Death Touch makes it so that our commander can essentially wipe the board. Just by casting 1 red spell, we deal 1 damage to all creatures without flying, and then they're dead. Now keep in mind that of course we need to protect our own creatures including our commander, but we've got plenty of ways to give our creatures flying. And outside of Death Touch, we've got another clever way to take out opponent's creatures as well. So now it's time for us to move on to tactic number 6, Cut Down to Size. First up, there's Polymorphous Jest, which says, until end of turn, each creature target player controls loses all abilities and becomes a blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1. In other words, we just have to cast 1 red spell and all their creatures are gone. Because not only does this make them into 1/1s, it also takes away flying if they had it. And then Mass Diminish is similar but somewhat different. It says, until your next turn, creature target player controls have base power and toughness 1/1, and it's got flashback for 3 and a blue. So this doesn't take away flying, but we can cast it twice. Regardless, these are both fantastic ways to take an entire army out of nowhere. But we've got plenty of other ways to deal with our opponent's things as well. So now it's time for us to move on to tactic number 7, Fly Away. First up, there's Blink of an Eye and Into the Royal, which do the exact same thing. They've got Kicker for 1 and a blue, and they say return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, draw a card. And then there's Aether Gale, which can bounce even more things. It says return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. And bouncing 6 things for 5 mana is a fantastic deal. Next up, there's Cowardice, which says whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, return that creature to its owner's hand. So essentially this turns all of our blue spells into bounce spells. When we cast a blue spell, we try to give an opponent's creature flying, but it's bounce instead. And Dismiss in a Dream is even better in this deck. It says each creature your opponents control is an illusion in addition to its other types and has, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. So now our blue spells essentially become kill spells. And of course we're running some counter spells as well, like Negate, which can counter target non-creature spell, and Wizard's Retort, which can counter any spell, and it also costs 1 less to cast if we control a wizard. Lucky for us, our commander meets that requirement. Next up, there's Swerve, which says change the target of target spell with a single target. And then Is It Charm says choose 1, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2, Is It Charm deals 2 damage to target creature, or draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. Finally, there's Counterflux, which can't be countered by spells or abilities, and it's going to counter target spell we don't control. On top of that, it's got Overload for 1 blue-blue-red. And the best part about each of these spells is that they're going to trigger both of our commander's abilities. Now, we've talked about affecting our opponent's board state, but how do we build our own? So it's time for us to move on to tactic number 8, Instant Army. First up, there's Improbable Alliance, which says whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. And then Murmuring Mystic makes us a 1/1 flyer every single time we cast an instant sorcery spell. Talrand Sky Summoner does the exact same thing, but it's a 2/2 with flying. With the amount of instants and sorceries we can cast in one turn, we can make a huge army very quickly. And we can also take advantage of all the spells that we've already cast with something like Rise from the Tides. It says create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard. Again, filling our graveyard with those types of spells is very easy for this deck, and now we can make a giant army with them. But we can also utilize our spells to win in a different way. So now let's move on to tactic number 2, Ping and Punish. First up, there's Gutter Snipe, which says whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. If this stays out just for a turn or 2, it can add up to a ton of damage. And then Rune Chanter Spike says equip creature has first strike and gets +X/+0, where X is the number of instant sorcery cards in your graveyard. So this can essentially turn our commander into a 2 or even 1-shot kill. A somewhat similar card is Scroll the Masters, which says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a lore counter on Scroll the Masters. And then by paying 3 and tapping it, target creature we control gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each lore counter on Scroll the Masters. So this can make our commander or another one of our creatures huge. But outside of winning with our creatures, we can also win with our opponents. So now let's move on to our final tactic, tactic number 10, Get Over Here. First up, there's Mass Mutiny, which says for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. And then Mob Rule can be even more effective. It says, choose 1. Gain control of all creatures with power 4 or greater until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. Or gain control of all creatures with power 3 or less until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. So we either can gain control of all the big creatures or all the small creatures, whichever is more effective in the situation that we're in. And then we've even got some creatures that can help us out as well with Molten Primordial, Dominus of Fealty, and Willbreaker. When Molten Primordial enters the battlefield, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. And then Dominus of Fealty says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may gain control of target permanent until end of turn. If you do, untap it and it gains haste until end of turn. But Willbreaker is by far the most effective and most brutal of all of these. She has, whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability you control, gain control of that creature for as long as you control Willbreaker. Again, by casting a blue spell with our commander in play, we target a creature, so have fun with that. Again, a huge thanks to Tyler. I had an absolute blast building this deck. But now let's see how our deck stacks up when it comes to cost and the price breakdown. The average Tibor and Lumia EDH rec deck is going to set you back $137.74. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at just $34.91. And with all that money that you're going to be saving, let's talk about some reasonable upgrades. First up, let's add in Reshape by taking out Tribute Mage. Next up, let's add in Docent of Perfection by taking out Improbable Alliance. And then let's add in Word of Invention by taking out Factor Fiction. Next up, let's add in Basilisk Collar by taking out Scroll the Masters. And then let's add in Quiet as Spike by taking out Vial of Poison. Finally, let's add in Charisma by taking out Molten Primordial. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this deck tech are. What could be improved on, and what do you like? So yeah, let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks again, and have a good one.